And Woke Trophy Kids presented by Bad News Media. It is the college football week 2 betting preview. As always, I am your host, Nate. If you are not a subscriber, I hope you subscribe. We have the NFL Week 1 podcast also coming out today. So that's loaded with a lot of good information. Me and my co-host Michael break down every game each week, give out our picks, what we're actually putting our money on. It's been a very profitable show for us over the last couple of years as far as a gambling standpoint. So hopefully you'll check that out. But we have some college football games in week 2 to talk about. It's not the best slate, but there's a lot of interesting matchups, some additional data points we'll be able to gather. Week 1 was all about getting eyeballs on games, getting a feel for where these teams are in their current offseason progressions. What with all the preseason work and breakdowns we did, where were we right? Where were we wrong? And we started on the first miss. We went 1-2 last week, and I missed on Virginia Tech. And hands up, Virginia Tech was not good. That was a bad game. Do I think Virginia Tech is out for my season-long prediction? No, not necessarily. But let's talk about what we saw there in the Vandy game, because that was a game that, to me, the coaching staff absolutely failed in. That was a Virginia Tech team that I thought came out and looked sluggish, looked like a team that just thought they could take the field and win because they're playing Vandy. Like, they saw the name on the schedule, but not the players that suited up for Vandy. And Vandy was ready to knock them in the mouth. I mean, you saw two of their starting corners for Vandy went down in camp. And what did they do right out of the gate? They played press man coverage on them. I mean, there's no bigger way of taking a swing at an offense than doing that. You had what was an absolutely fantastic performance from Pavia, the quarterback at Vanderbilt. He came out with his hair on fire, and Virginia Tech was slow to respond. We saw in the second half that they kind of pushed the easy button and came storming back, but by then it was a little too late. So I'm not completely out on Virginia Tech as a whole. If Kyron Jones is going to play the way he played throughout that game, though, for the season, it could be pretty brutal. But I am chalking that up to just a poor coaching display as far as getting the guys mentally ready to play that week 1 game, to not go out and just lay an egg in the first half. There's a ton of talent on this team. There's a ton of returning production. We've gone over all that in the ACC breakdown. I'm still a big fan of the Virginia Tech team overall. And you saw kind of why this team has so much buzz around it. And one of the reasons I was so high on it that I took their over win total on the season. Let's see what they do in this Marshall. And that's the first play I got. I got Virginia Tech plus or minus 10.5, against Marshall in the first half. I want to see this team come out firing off the ball. Like, they got whooped. They got embarrassed as a double-digit favorite in week 1. What kind of fight does this team have? Who are the guys on this team that are actually here to play football and not be off-season champs of buzz? Because that's what we're looking for in this game, I thought. So I do take Virginia Tech plus 10.5. The other team I want to talk about is the USC Trojans. That was a fantastic game. I lost that bet. It was the other bet we lost. We took the over in that game. And I thought that was 2 very good performances by the LSU and USC program. For USC specifically, so far ahead of schedule on defense, it's not even funny. If that's what they're going to look like consistently week in and week out, they're a top 4 team in the Big Ten. Like, this transition in the Big Ten is going to be much easier. Offensively, it went as about I thought it would go. Miller Moss steps in to some pretty big shoes that Caleb Williams left, but I thought the transition would be pretty seamless because of Miller Moss's willingness to play more in the system, play more in structure. He had some great ball placement in that game, I thought. The one thing I'm going to flag for USC moving forward, though, is because of Miller Moss's stature, a lot of batted balls down the line and almost a lot of turnovers because of those batted balls. Let's see. Lincoln Riley has done a really good job in the past of getting his quarterbacks moving off their spot a little bit to avoid some of those batted passes, because he has dealt with quarterbacks that are smaller in stature. So let's see if that happens with Miller Moss, if they kind of move him around in the pocket a little bit more, move the pocket a bit, and see if they can open that off. But offensively, I thought it went well. Defensively for USC, that was an absolutely fantastic performance. Like, I knew we called for improvement going into the season. Really a big fan of the defensive coordinator. I thought they were going to be better. Hard not to be. But what I saw was a team that looked bought in. They were willing tacklers. They were wrapping up. They were coming downhill and driving through their guys. They were playing with a lot of energy defensively. And that's fantastic to see. Like, that looked like a defense that was bought into what they're doing defensively. Physically, they looked a lot better. Like, the offseason development clearly took with this team, and they bought in And that's absolutely fantastic for USC. So they are in for a very nice season, I think. It was a team that I had talked about in the preseason about being better than their record might reflect at the end of the season. But now I think the record might reflect a lot better than anticipated. It's a really tough schedule, so we'll see. We'll see what the wear and tear looks like with the travel that they have in front of them. But overall, I thought if that's the team we're going to get consistently on defense, and the offense is going to look the way it's going to look, and Lincoln Riley is an offensive savant and does a really good job on the offensive side of the ball, then USC is a top 4 team in the Big Ten. Like their transition is going to go seamlessly. On the LSU side of things, I thought Garrett Nussmeier looked really good. I thought defensively, I walked away feeling pretty decent about that. I will say for LSU, though, the secondary could be a problem. That's something we flagged in the SEC preview because they didn't go out and spend and get get guys in the portal to really help upgrade the defensive line. Defensive line and secondary play work so much in tandem, especially in the collegiate level. And I don't think the LSU secondary is up to snuff. Like there are some weaknesses there. If they had really kind of beefed up that defensive line and had some dudes in that room, I'd feel a little bit better about this. But I think, and I said it in the preseason, that they are going to regret not being more aggressive in the portal on the defensive line specifically. But we'll see how that develops over the course of the season. Like I left feeling more optimistic about LSU as a defensive team coming into the season. I wasn't super high on them, but they looked really good, I thought, in that game. And offensively, like that was just a really good game. They lost a good game. It wasn't like something where you're like, wow, where is LSU at as a program? I walked away going, that was a really competitive game. It was a really good game. They were just off in some areas. There's room for improvement. They can get better, but overall, pleasantly surprised. All right, let's talk about some of the marquee games this weekend. Texas, Michigan is where we start. Line is 7.5. Over, under is currently sitting at 42.5. This is a massive matchup, right? Like this is a quarterback edge to Texas, but the rest of this game has some really interesting matchups to kind of get some good data points as to where these two teams are. Offensively, that first week couldn't be more polar opposite, though, for these two teams. You had a Texas offense 16th in success rate, Michigan 72nd in success rate. This was a Michigan offense that coming into the season, there was a lot of concerns around what this passing game could look like because Alex Orji presents virtually zero threat in the passing game. And Warren, while he was the better quarterback in camp, not great option, right? And they have this weird split they're doing here. Like, I don't mind if Alex Orji is coming in on goal line packages or sprinkling him in here and there. But if you're going to run this like 2-quarterback system, in my opinion, it's the old saying, if you have 2 quarterbacks, you have 0 quarterbacks. I believe in that. Like, there has to be a guy to have this job, to be able to get into a rhythm and a rhyme during the game, right? To kind of be able to be a threat in the passing game. If you don't have that, there are massive concerns for Michigan just as a whole this season. But in this game specifically, the edge at quarterback obviously goes to Texas, right? Like Quentin Ewers is the best quarterback in this matchup without question, like not even close. The question for the Texas offense, though, is what is this offensive line going to look like? Talked about it coming into the season for the SEC preview show. This was an offensive line that at times last year looked elite. You look at that Alabama game, right? They played extremely good, but consistency was lacking throughout the season. There were times they were very kind of up and down. The floor is set high, but they were still up and down. Coming into the season, talked a lot about if Texas really wants to make a push for a national championship here, to compete in the SEC, to be that team that a lot of people think they can be, they have to be consistently good in the offense line. 4 or 5 starters are back. They have some real dudes in that unit, like Banks at left tackle. Fantastic left tackle. You are going against one of the best front sevens, though, in all of college football this weekend. Michigan, coming into the season, I thought was a top 3 front seven. If they have a chance to be the best in college football, like that is a nasty defensive line. This is going to be a real, test for Texas too, because Wink is a fastball pitcher. That's all he has. He has one pitch. It is a fastball. Can you hit that fastball? He's going to blink. It is going to be up to Steve Sarkisian to have a game plan that can combat the heavy blitz rate that Texas is going to see. And Quentin Ewers to not panic during those blitzing, because we've seen when, you speed up Quentin Ewers, you get pressure on him, things start to fall apart for him. Texas is going to spread Michigan wide this game. Like, I don't think there's any question about that. There's not much of a threat from the Texas run perspective. Like they struggled to run the ball against Colorado State. So Can their wide receivers win in space? Will Johnson's a dog for Michigan. We know that. He's arguably one of the best football players in the country. He's going to be locked down in his guy. Can the other guys win their one-on-ones? Can the other guys create an open space? Can they find the soft parts of the defense? That's going to be a major question mark. You flip it, though. Can Texas stuff the run? Now, Michigan's offensive line didn't look great last week. It's an offensive line that I had a feeling might take a little bit of time to gel. Sherrone Moore, though, is an offensive line coach. That's his background. Like, I anticipate that line to get better, but can they get much better from last week? Like, they didn't look great against Fresno. And even though, Texas is replacing their all-world interior defensive lineman from last season in Sweat and Murphy, they didn't look particularly good on the inside. Colorado State averaged 2.2 yards before first contact last week against Texas. That isn't good. That's got to get better. So that's going to be an interesting matchup right there. Where the number sits today, the higher it goes, the better I feel about a Michigan. I feel like Texas is in a great spot to put in maybe a teaser bet here, because at the end of the day, I do think Texas wins this football game. But at 7, 7.5, 8, the questions really start to swirl about whether it is a very good risk reward proposition to put it on Texas here, because there are matchup edges that I definitely give Texas, but with just how good that Michigan defense can be, I don't know if I want to be laying my money there. But 7, no hook, that becomes a different question. I will tweet out that pick, though, on Trophy Kids Podcast social. So make sure you are following on there for game day pick. But I definitely like it more in a teaser like here. All right. So as we move down the board, this is a game that I'm not going to spend a ton of time on, but worth mentioning. Arkansas, Oklahoma State. Lions at 7.5, over under 63. Arkansas, this is what I was talking about, though, with the Taylor Green experience. You saw a little bit of it last week. Now, granted, it's against Arkansas Pine Bluff, but still. Taylor Green is an electric quarterback to watch. He is very up and down. He's the volatility king. His strides are like 5 yards a pop, though. And in this Bobby Petrino power spread offense, if Bobby Petrino can unlock more consistency out of Taylor Green, this offense is going to be a lot of fun to watch. Like, it just is. I talked about it in the preseason. Like, I really like the upside of Arkansas's offense here. You're getting an Oklahoma State team, though, very experienced, especially up front on their offensive line and offensively here. But we're still in the early part of the year. We know that this Oklahoma State team is not always on their P's and Q's early in the year. They're not, the small details can sometimes be lacking. They usually are a team that comes on stronger later in the year. Let's kind of keep an eye on Arkansas in this game. I don't anticipate them necessarily winning this game, but if Oklahoma State is not careful and you get good Taylor Green in this game, the Razorbacks are coming. All right. Like, we're just going to say that right now. They're coming down the pipes. All right. Moving on from that, give me Kansas State versus Tulane. Give me Kansas State at 9. There's no hook on it right now. Kansas State didn't show much last week. I am a little concerned they might not show a ton here, but I do think this is where they start to kind of continue to add that next layer, that next progression into their season and their playbook, into their formations, everything. So I do like Kansas State there. All right, let's talk about the game that everybody is wanting to talk about. Colorado versus Nebraska. Line is at 7, over under 59. The rivalry was renewed. This is an awesome game. I cannot wait to watch this one. Colorado versus Nebraska, I think, will be fantastic. And we're going to start breaking this game down with the Colorado offense versus the Nebraska defense. And we saw last year this Nebraska defense have a hard time keep up with the Colorado athletes on the outside. Shadur Sanders threw for nearly 400 yards in this game. But here's the problem for Colorado coming into this game. You watch that North Dakota State game. Give a shout out to Jordan Seaton. I thought he did a fantastic job as a true freshman starting at left tackle. The interior part of that line, though, has got some problems. There wasn't a ton of push against North Dakota State. And North Dakota State's average weight of their two deep defensive linemen is 261. Nebraska's average weight, 276. And that includes Polar Bear the Nash, who weighs in at 311, 6'4", and Robinson, 6'6", 311. It's a lot of beef up front to try to block and to try to establish some form of a run game, because I think that's what Nebraska is going to do here. They're going to dare Colorado to develop some form of a run game, because you cannot, I don't think Nebraska can keep up with these wide receivers. And we saw Colorado use a lot of 4 or 5 wide receiver sets. I think that's in direct response to the tight end room not being where it needs to be. And that could be a problem down the road in the Big 12 because so many of these defenses in the Big 12 are built to beat these 4 and 5 wide receiver high flying offenses. But for this game, Nebraska could get lost in space again if they try to like man these guys up and they don't sort of play this, keep everything in front, swarm to the ball, death by 1,000 paper cuts. Because that, if you're a Nebraska fan, if you're a Nebraska backer, is sort of what you want to see. You want to see this Nebraska team just drop everybody back in coverage, let their big defensive linemen try to win their battles up front and push around that Colorado offensive line and just keep everything in front of you so that it is a more methodical system that Colorado has to utilize. You are getting to the red zone a lot, but there some of these matchups then start to turn more favorable into Nebraska's side of the football. Like Travis Hunter is awesome. He is him. He's a phenomenal player, one of the best football players in the country, if not the best football player in the country. There's an incredibly strong argument that he is the best football player in the country. But they didn't really have a lot of other answers on offense when they got to the red zone outside of Travis Hunter. So then the advantage starts to move to Nebraska defensively. Offensively, Nebraska versus this Colorado defense. I talked about this in the Big Ten preview, though. Nebraska's quarterbacks last year accounted for 81% of their turnovers. In this game alone last season, there were 4 turnovers, 3 of which were committed by the quarterback position. Dylan Raiola, even though he's a freshman, is an automatic upgrade over Jeff Sims in every way. That doesn't mean Dylan Raiola isn't going to have some freshman potholes. That doesn't mean Dylan Raiola isn't going to have some turnovers to him. That isn't to say that Dylan Raiola is this perfect quarterback, Patrick Mahomes. We know he's cosplaying as Patrick Mahomes essentially at this point. But he isn't Patrick Mahomes. I just don't know if Colorado has the defense to really force Nebraska's hand here. Like, I do think Nebraska is going to kind of be a run-heavy team here. They're going to be more methodical with this. They're going to pick and choose their spots. They've got the wide receivers on the outside. That's going to be the interesting part. Colorado, I saw played over 80 or 7. Sorry. I saw last week that Colorado stat played over 71% of their coverages in man with a free roaming safety. I'm going to be super interested if Nebraska has seen what I'm seeing in the weak link in that secondary, or weak links, I should say. But there's one specifically that I think that they can pick on this week. Let's see if that happens. Because to me, as a fan on the couch, it became pretty obvious some of the downfalls in this secondary. The middle of the field is also just wide open. See if they attack that. See if Colorado's defense has cleaned that up a little bit. Let's see if this Colorado defensive line, for the talent they have in that room, can take a step forward after last week. I thought they were good, but I really had high hopes for that defensive line. I think it's a talented group. I think it's the second most talented room on Colorado. Can they be that, though? Consistently? Can they win when they get some one-on-one blocking assignments? What does that look like? Overall, I do give the edge to Nebraska in this game. It's just going to be interesting to see the kind of chess match, the game within the games that are happening within Colorado and Nebraska, and see how they can kind of battle back and forth, because it's going to be very interesting. It's going to be very telling for what these two teams' outlooks are going to be on this season. I haven't made a wager just yet. I'm leaning towards Nebraska 7. But once again, maybe this is a teaser type of deal, tease this with Texas or something and tease these down to 1. Maybe the play, we'll see. But it's going to be interesting. How does Nebraska elect to defend Colorado's offense? Do they not get lost in space against these wide receivers? Can Colorado establish some resemblance of a run game to help take some things off Shedur's plate? Nebraska, if you take away the turnovers, how does this Nebraska offense look against this defense? A lot of interesting questions are going to be asked and answered this week. Iowa State versus Iowa. Line is at 3, over under 35. Iowa's offense looked a whole lot better. Now, it's only a 1-game sample size. But I thought the Iowa offense looked a lot better because they were using more motion. They were using more play action. Cade looked a lot more comfortable physically. He seemed to have more trust in his leg. You saw him being a willing runner. He looked better in the pocket, not sort of very antsy in there, stepping into throws. That's massive for Iowa because defensively, we know they're going to be great. Like last week, they were 11th in EPA defensively, 7th in success rate. They forced some turnovers, just like a really solid unit. Iowa State's got some problems, especially on the defense side. The linebacker room has already sustained injuries. A guy that I flagged in the Big 12 preview show, Caleb Bacon, somebody who I thought was going to have a breakout season. The coaching staff was really high on him, injured out for this game. That's going to be massive. Offensively, a lot is going to be put on Rocco's shoulders. I don't know if he's up to answer the bell here. This is going to be a bit of a slugfest. I did go ahead and take Iowa. Defensively, they're just so good and consistent. Special teams, there were some bright spots in that week 1. Offensively, I'm a little nervous that Kirk is going to be back on the sidelines. He might handicap them a little bit, but things looked a little bit better here than initially anticipated. It's only week 1, but I am willing to wager on Iowa here to cover that number. So I did go ahead and take them. Boise State, Oregon, lines at 20, over under 61.5. I talked about this show on my TikTok page. I talked about this matchup on my TikTok page. Oregon was unimpressive in that Idaho-Oregon game, but I'm not panicking on them just yet. We have to react, but not overreact. There were things I jotted down that were like, that's interesting. Let's see how that progresses in game 2. That game against Iowa, to me, read as a game that they just were throwing away. They were using it as a preseason. It was getting it out. I mean, you had guys in the fourth quarter of a close ball game dancing on the sideline when shout was being played. Like, this was a team that looked like they were taking this somewhat unseriously. The offensive line had availability issues. They had to do some reshuffling, which had a walk-on playing at center. If those offensive line problems were going to be consistent long-term, I'd have massive concerns about Oregon. This is a game that the offensive line has to come firing off the ball, though. They should be getting Bedford back at guard, which allows their I can't pronounce his name, Lapone. Great offensive lineman, can play all across the line. He gets to move back to center. Can they get push up front? Boise is not a great defense. Oregon has to win in the trenches. If they're not winning in the trenches in this week, now we start to panic a little bit about Oregon long term. But let's see what they bring in. Offensively, let's see what they do from an offensive schematic standpoint. I didn't think they tried to show a lot in that game. Let's see, is Dylan being a willing thrower to the right side of the field? He didn't attack the right side of the field a whole lot in that first week. See how they layer their passing scheme and their routes. Like, what does that layering look like? How is he able to attack each level of the field? I want to see a little bit more. The reason I'm saying I want to see a little bit more, and if we don't see it this week, it's time to panic, is because Dan Lanning, every report seems to be him using this game similar to how he used Colorado. Like, all right, this is when our season starts. We have to hit the ground running. We got to put pedal to the metal and go. And so this is where I want to see this Oregon team firing. If they don't fire in this game, there's levels for concern at that point, because the coaching staff at least seems to have the mentality that this is a massive game for us. This is Boise State. We have to treat them seriously. We have to put our best foot forward. We have to show who we're going to be this season in the trenches, defensively, from a passing standpoint, from a running standpoint. Can we gain something on the run? Can we beat down on a lesser opponent? That is what this game shows to me. And if they can't do it, then I have concerns about Oregon. But right now, I don't have tons of concerns. I have some worry. Like, Ohio State has now moved into the 1 position in the Big Ten for me. Oregon was initially in the 1 spot. I now have Ohio State in the 1 spot. Let's see what they look like. Defensively, though, how do you defend the run? I mean, Idaho only ran it 11 times, but they were averaging 2.9 yards before first contact. That is horrible, especially with what they spent on the offensive line or defensive line. They have to be better. Oregon's got to get better gap discipline. They got to get better push on the defensive line. They have to be better this week. We all know what Jonty did last week for Boise State. Broke a lot of arm tackles. Oregon, here's your shot. How good are you at tackling? How good are you at gap discipline? How good are you at setting the edge and not missing your lanes? Can you be good form tackles and drive through a guy? Massive, massive questions for Oregon. I think they're going to answer the bell this week, but this is a game that I will be watching intensely. I don't have a bet in this one, but we need to see certain levels of improvement. Tennessee, North Carolina State. Line is at 8, over under 61. Nico is him. I was really excited about Nico heading into this season. He looked absolutely fantastic. It's a 1-game sample against Chattanooga, but man, he looked really good. I thought this was a perfect marriage between skill set and talent, an offensive scheme and what Heupel runs. It's a perfect marriage, I think, at Tennessee. You should be ecstatic, I think, at Tennessee. And I think this is a game where they could have a runaway train situation for North Carolina State. This is a defense. I respect Tony Gibson a ton. I think he's one of the best defensive minds in the country, but they are very much reeling from the loss of Wilson to the NFL. He was their do-everything linebacker. He was see ball, get ball. He was your a magic erase marker to kind of cover up all the errors and shortcoming for this North Carolina State defense last season. They did not look good in their week 1. I also, similarly to Oregon, am wondering how much did they really show, especially the offensive side. Was that tempo really what they're going to run, or are they going to be more up tempo like we thought? Will Grayson McCall be more of a willing runner in their offensive sets? Because the arm talent, we talked about it in the preseason, incredibly accurate guy, just not a very strong arm. Like he can't get the ball there on a line. He's not going to push it super deep on you. He's more of an accuracy guy. He's more of a play smart, make sure your risk reward system is aligned correctly. That type of quarterback. Athletic guy, get him more mobile. I am concerned though, because while the offensive weapons looked great, I like Justin Jolly. I like Kevin Consumpcion. The offensive line struggled to get push up front. I really like this Tennessee defensive line. I did take Tennessee at -8. I think we could be dealing with it, or I apologize. It was 8 last night. It's jumped all the way up to 10. I apologize here, folks. I just looked at the board. It's now sitting at 10. I do feel like this could be a little bit of a runaway train type of situation in Tennessee. So that is all I have for this week. It's a relatively short board once again. We're going to really get into the nitty-gritty in the coming weeks, but this is kind of the last week of, all right, let me really get a feel for these teams. The bets I've been given are what I have. Give out more potentially on social here. Hopefully you're following our social channel, Trophy Kids Pod, at the Trophy Kid, subscribing to our YouTube page. We've got a lot of bets, a lot of good football games coming. Going to get a lot of eyeballs on a lot of games this week. And then next week, we're going to be ready to roll and really kind of start betting up here. But don't want to force anything in the early weeks. Don't want to overreact. Just react. Let's see what these teams look like in week 2. That's what I got for you. I hope you check out the NFL Pod. And as always, peace.